before we begin our panel. And I'd very much like to welcome the Honourable Philip Davies, the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, to come up and deliver his opening address.
Thank you very much. Friends, first of all, I would wish to just acknowledge the presence of the contingent from the Bahamas, led by the Chamber of Commerce and Employers Confederation entity, Mr. Valentino Rowe, and his team. We're well represented. It's indeed a pleasure to be here in Samoa. It feels to me like coming home. The warmth of the people, the stunning landscapes, and the deep sense of community remind me so much of the islands of the Bahamas. It's a feeling that connects us across oceans, and it's what makes the Commonwealth truly special. We are a family of nations, diverse in culture, yet united in spirit and purpose. Today, I want to share a story that embodies the power of the Commonwealth. It's a story of economic strength and human talent. And it begins with a vision to bridge continents and create new pathways for resiliency and prosperity. Earlier this year, the Bahamas had the privilege of hosting the Afrin-Exim Bank's annual board and general meeting, along with the African Caribbean Trade and Investment Show. For the first time, this major African development finance institution held its gathering outside of Africa, choosing our capital, Nassau, as the venue. When we first discussed this possibility, there were skeptics. People wondered why an African bank would look to the Caribbean. But for us, it was clear. We saw an opportunity to create a new chapter of partnership between Africa and the Caribbean. Two regions with shared histories and shared dreams. The event for us held a more fundamental meaning than just a conference. It was a message to the world that the Commonwealth is more than a collection of nations. It's a dynamic network capable of fostering collaboration and innovation across borders. When we hosted the Afro-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum alongside the Afri-Exim Bank General Meeting in Nassau, there were over 7,000 delegates that attended, mostly from Africa, highlighting a significant link between Africa and the Caribbean. Entrepreneurs found partners, policymakers shared regulatory insights, and industry leaders discussed sustainable growth. It was a powerful moment of connection and shared aspirations. For the Bahamas, it was a moment to shine, but more importantly, it was a moment to showcase what's possible when we think beyond traditional boundaries. The success of this event reminded me of why the Commonwealth matters. It's not just about economic transactions, it's about the exchange of ideas, the sharing of expertise, and the building of relationships that endure. Our strength lies in our diversity and our ability to draw from a rich pool of human talent, from the financial hubs of London and Singapore to the emerging tech sectors in Kenya and Jamaica. The Commonwealth is brimming with creativity, innovation, and skill. But if we are to harness this potential, we must address one of the greatest challenges facing our economies: access to finance. For small island developing states and emerging markets, financial barriers can be a significant hurdle. Without adequate funding, how can we invest in the infrastructure, education, and healthcare that are essential for development? How can we support our entrepreneurs, our innovators, and our visionaries if they cannot access the capital they need to bring their idea to life? Imagine the profound injustice of having to shoulder the burden of a climate crisis we did not create, a crisis that threatens to swallow our coastlines, devastate our agriculture, and disrupt the very livelihoods of our people. Imagine the shockwaves of a global pandemic, knowing that while some nations had seamless access to life-saving vaccines, others faced hurdles that left millions vulnerable and unprotected. And consider the economic tremors that have shaken our economies, shocks that were set in motion far from our shores, yet hit our nations the hardest. These are not just challenges, they are tests of our resilience and our unity. But even in the face of these formidable challenges, we stand on the cusp of immense opportunity. The combined GDP of the Commonwealth countries in 2021 was $13.1 trillion. And it is projected to surge to $19.5 trillion by 2027, nearly doubling from $10.4 trillion in 2017. This isn't just a statistics. It is a testament to the potential of our shared strength. It's a powerful reminder that when united, the Commonwealth is more than a sum of its parts. We have the collective economic might, the human ingenuity, and the will to shape a future where every nation, regardless of its size, has the opportunity to thrive. This is where the Commonwealth can make a difference. We have the collective knowledge and resources to find new solutions to these challenges. In the Bahamas, we have seen how blended finance, combining public and private sector funding, how that can create opportunities where none existed before. We have seen the importance of building trust in our financial institutions, ensuring that investors feel confident that their funds are secure and well managed. This stability fosters an environment where businesses can grow, where jobs can be created, and where economies can thrive. I believe the Commonwealth has a critical role to play in this space. By facilitating conversations, sharing best practices, and providing technical support, we can strengthen financial systems across our member states. We can create environments where businesses, large and small, can flourish. Let me tell you another story. This is one about a partnership between the Bahamas and Botswana. A few years ago, Botswana was facing challenges related to the OECD banking regulations. They were complex issues, and finding a solution wasn't easy. But rather than facing these challenges alone, Botswana reached out to us. We shared our experiences, particularly our work in digital currency regulations. Through this partnership, we were able to help Botswana navigate their regulatory hurdles. And in the process, we both learned and we grew. This collaboration wasn't just about solving a problem. It was about building a relationship based on trust and mutual respect. It was a perfect example of the Commonwealth's power to connect, to support, and to elevate. Another example of how the Caribbean and Africa are strengthening ties is through the Pan-African Payments Settlement Systems, PAPS. Developed by the Afri-Exim Bank, PAPS was created to address a long-standing challenge in Africa, complex and costly cross-border payments. By streamlining transactions, it made trade across African countries easier, faster, and more affordable. Recognizing the shared economic potential, Afri-Exim Bank is piloting this system in the Caribbean, aiming to create deeper integration between our regions and between our countries. For years, businesses on both sides of the Atlantic faced barriers when trying to trade, often relying on costly intermediaries. With PAPS, a business in the Bahamas can now easily engage with a supplier in Ghana, and a tech startup in Nigeria can partner with a firm in Barbados without the complexities of currency conversion. The system removes barriers, fosters economic collaboration, and encourages businesses to explore new opportunities across borders. PAPS doesn't just simplify payments, it builds bridges. It brings our economies closer, showing how the Caribbean and Africa can work together to build more interconnected and resilient markets, where businesses of all sizes can grow and thrive. These are the stories we need to tell more often, stories of how nations, big and small, come together to solve problems, share resources, and create opportunities. Stories of how the Commonwealth can be a force for good, not just in terms of economic wealth, but in nurturing human talent. Our network is vast, stretching across continents, and within it, we have the tools, the expertise, and the passion to drive real change. As I look around this room, I see the potential for the next chapter of our Commonwealth story. I see the opportunity for more events like the African Bank meeting, where leaders come together to forge new partnerships. I see the possibility for more collaborations like the one between the Bahamas and Botswana, where we use our collective knowledge to address challenges that no nation should face alone. Friends, we are at a pivotal moment. The world is changing rapidly, and we must adapt to ensure that our economies remain resilient and competitive. This is why initiatives like the Bridgetown Financing Agenda, led by Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados, are so important. This agenda seeks to reform the global financial system and architects to better accommodate nations burdened by high debt. It's a call for fairness, for an approach that recognizes the unique vulnerabilities of countries like mine. The Bahamas stands fully behind this initiative because we understand the importance of creating a financial system that works for everyone, not just a select few. The Commonwealth has the opportunity to lead in this area. We can be the champions of an equitable financial system that supports development and growth. We can create platforms for innovation, for investment, and for collaboration that benefit all of our member states. As I close, I want to leave you with a vision. We come from different countries, different traditions, and different ways of life. Whether it's the bustling markets of Lagos, where entrepreneurs rise with the sun, or the serene shores of the Caribbean, where communities pull together to build resilience against storms. Our nations are defined by the strength and spirit of our people. From the spice fields of Grenada to the tech hubs of Nairobi, we share a common desire to see our people thrive, to see opportunity reach every corner of our societies. Let's work together to make wealth more common in the Commonwealth. Too often, prosperity is concentrated, leaving many of our nations to face economic challenges alone. But we have the tools, we have the talent, and we will change this. Imagine a network where talent flows freely, where entrepreneurs in Barbados can seamlessly connect with an investor in Kenya, or where a small business in Trinidad can find partners in India without barriers. By breaking down the obstacles that limit trade and innovation and fostering a culture of collaboration, we can ensure that opportunity and success are shared across all of our member states. When we say Commonwealth, let's truly mean a community where wealth, knowledge, and opportunity are accessible to all. Imagine a Commonwealth that is not just united in name, but united in purpose, driving forward a new era of inclusive economic growth. This is the Commonwealth I believe in, one where every nation, regardless of size or wealth, can access the resources they need to thrive. This is the Commonwealth we can build together, where the wealth is more common for us all. Thank you.
We thank you very much, Prime Minister. I know you have to leave soon. And I think there's an important message in what you said. I always think of the Commonwealth, collaboration is the new survival. So thank you very much for that important message. So now, without further ado, the Commonwealth Business Forum wouldn't be possible without our anchor sponsor for the moment, and that's BSP Financial Group. So I would really like to welcome our anchor's partner up, Mark Robinson, to speak to us and give us an address before we dive into our panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Loretta. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here today. As Loretta said, I'm the CEO of BSP Financial Group, or otherwise known as Bank of the South Pacific. We're a 67-year-old truly Pacific bank, headquartered in Papua New Guinea and operating in 7 countries right across the Pacific, including, most importantly today, our host country, Samoa. As a career banker of over 30 years in both developed markets and many emerging markets, I've seen many countries evolve and prosper. I am a believer in the tremendous potential of the Pacific Island countries, yet I've also seen firsthand some of the barriers preventing markets from realizing their full potential. Financial inclusion is absolutely essential to harness opportunities and overcome these barriers. Today, the panel will discuss how we might better enable access to finance, and I will share some examples of the initiatives that BSP is undertaking in this regard. I'm genuinely looking forward to this being an informative and inspiring session, given the panel that we've assembled today. Let's talk for a moment about Pacific Island potential. The Pacific is characterized by young and diverse populations, abundant natural resources, and globally significant marine and natural ecosystems. The Pacific Island countries hold tremendous potential if harnessed correctly. And I think the Prime Minister this morning said, quoted this, I'll quote it again, but 56% of the Pacific Island population is between 10 and 25 years of age. And the social, economic, and environmental development in the Pacific will rely more fully on harnessing the potential of its future generations. As the Pacific works to develop a young, educated, and empowered workforce, we can anticipate a corresponding expansion of formal employment and the creation of new investment opportunities. Beyond the human potential, Pacific countries are also incredibly rich in natural resources, with much of the region's 40-plus billion in GDP coming from minerals and energy extraction. And beyond extractive industries, we have natural resources that also underpin our economies, such as agriculture, forestry, and fishing. Of perhaps existential value to our planet and humanity at large, the Pacific is also home to globally significant marine and natural ecosystems. Papua New Guinea contains one of the largest tropical forests in the world, and several South Pacific countries are in the Coral Triangle, which in itself contributes over $6 billion annually in both export revenue and tourism revenue to various economies. Pacific Island countries are well placed to capitalize on blue economy and green economy initiatives, but to do so we need to ensure we protect and nurture these ecosystems. Realizing the full potential of the Pacific in a responsible and sustainable way translates directly to collective prosperity and will both require as well as inspire deeper trade relationships and FDI growth. However, achieving the full potential of the region will require us to learn from the challenges faced by many emerging markets. Human capital development is often hindered by underemployment, unemployment, and skilled worker immigration. Much of this is driven by the inability of people and markets to move out of the informal economy into the formal economy. These factors in turn create a vicious cycle where skill gaps persist and access to essential services like legal protections, financial services, and education continues to be inconsistent. Also, there's an over-reliance on remittances, which is particularly relevant in many countries where they're a key source of national income. It lowers labor force participation and in many cases leaves countries more vulnerable to exchange rate fluctuations. Heavy reliance on commodities and the lack of strong policy frameworks place countries at risk of the resource curse, a failure to meaningfully balance extraction and environmental damage and fairly distribute economic benefits. And natural ecosystems are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, a reality acutely felt in Pacific Island countries. Also, an inconsistent environment for foreign direct investment in the Pacific makes investment promotion efforts more difficult. As a result, Pacific Island countries are subject to high levels of public debt and dependence on foreign aid, which can result in unsustainable repayment burdens and vulnerability to rising interest rates. Financial inclusion, defined broadly, can break down these barriers and encourage economic growth and prosperity on every level. On a macroeconomic level, financial inclusion leads to stronger economic growth, more effective monetary policies, and greater financial stability. At a business level, financial inclusion are associated with reduced inequality and poverty, with early efforts such as the UNDP Financial Inclusion Program helping almost 2 million low-income Pacific Islanders gain access to financial services and, importantly, financial education. Financial inclusion policies that promote business and SME growth and individual participation in the formal economy can help turn economic growth into per capita growth in Pacific Island countries, ensuring every level of society gains. Scalable, business-driven growth can be accelerated by leveraging interventions across 4 key areas: government, private sector initiatives, expanding access to credit, increasing access to digital and non-traditional financial services, and institutional trust building. Firstly, government-private sector initiatives such as mobility schemes, public-private partnerships, and development projects can effectively bridge productivity gaps through interventions such as targeted training. One example is that BSP partners with the Australian Business Volunteers to deliver a training program for SMEs in Papua New Guinea, Samoa, and Fiji. The program equips over 300 SME participants with essential financial literacy skills and business knowledge, and we in turn grant successful graduates of the program access to financing. PPP schemes create opportunities for local, small and medium-sized enterprises by integrating them into projects, thereby opening new markets and expanding their reach. And the World Bank's Urban Youth Employment Project, an initiative supported in part by BSP, was designed to provide training and employment opportunities for young people in Papua New Guinea, as well as an income transfer provision and infrastructure aligned with these goals. Secondly, expanding access to credit, including for agribusiness and blue economy initiatives, is absolutely vital for SME growth and development. For instance, BSP recently established 7,000 accounts for farmers in West New Britain, Papua New Guinea, to ultimately facilitate the availability of agricultural loans for them. Additionally, BSP has partnered with the Papua New Guinea government to fund over 3,000 local businesses. Perhaps uniquely, BSP also focuses on providing greater physical access to financial services. In fact, there's a statistic that I quite like. 47 of our 125 branches across the Pacific are in locations where we are the only bank there, with our bankers often providing essential advice and assistance in these markets beyond just transaction services. Thirdly, digital and non-traditional financial services. They're a powerful tool for increasing access to financial services and can help reach unbanked populations at scale, lower costs, and smooth the transition from an informal to a formal economy. BSP is in advanced stages of further enhancing our flagship USSD offering into a mobile wallet, enabling those in regional and remote areas without access to the internet, smartphones, and branches to effectively bank, transact, and make remittances. We will roll this out across PNG in the coming months and select countries in the South Pacific early next year. Beyond technology, and given the persistent dependence on cash in our markets, innovations such as our BSP's network of over 400 cash agents help support rural SMEs and individuals. Finally, building a foundation of trust is key to driving inclusive growth. This is especially important in supporting entrepreneurial activity in developing developing countries. Strategies such as engaging with the community and offering a wide range of language and country-specific services and being sensitive to gender-specific challenges in financial inclusion can help build this trust, ultimately facilitating a common prosperity. As the largest bank headquartered in the region, we see ourselves as having a unique obligation to act in ways that build trust in financial services and to continually modernize ourselves to redefine what the people of the Pacific can expect from their banks, not just for the urban few, but for the population and businesses at large. In conclusion, by prioritizing financial inclusion at all levels and embracing targeted initiatives around government and private partnerships, access to credit, digital and non-traditional banking services, and fostering trust, we can unlock the immense potential of the Pacific. This will open new opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises, boost trade and FDI, enhance productivity, and foster sustainable development, paving the way for a more prosperous future. I look forward to an informative panel discussion this morning on all the ideas to improve access to finance and unlock and scale up growth and shared prosperity across our homes in the Pacific and indeed throughout the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you very much, Mark, for that. Our panel, I've got a very esteemed member of people on my panel today, and I'm very blessed to be able to be your moderator. Access to finance and scalability of finance. There's a lot to unpack here. It's a very big topic. But first of all, I would like to just introduce my panel and for each of them to just give a quick introduction on who they are. We'll start with you, John, please.
Thank you very much. I'm very delighted to be here. My name is James Johnson. I co-head the Red Wheel Emerging and Frontier team. We run about $10 billion across emerging markets, so it gives me the chance to spend a lot of time in countries that play cricket, which is wonderful. I was in Pakistan, which is very interesting to see the Multan wicket. I was born in Nairobi, grew up in the UK, lived in Singapore for 10 years, so I spent a lot of time in the Commonwealth. And as I say, I've got a very wonderful job invested in wonderful countries with wonderful demographics and a very exciting future ahead of us.
Hello, I'm Jen Price. I'm the CEO of Calvert Impact, and it's an honor to be with you today. U.S.-based, so I'm from America, Washington, D.C. I call home, although I have lived across the Commonwealth, Australia, and the U.K. over my life. But we raise, manage, and invest private capital, primarily in the U.S., $10 billion. And very akin to what Mark was saying, we really want to get it into the nooks and crannies where it isn't going today. So low-income populations, rural, tribal, smaller of the smallest businesses. And what we're trying to do at the heart of it is show that those types of investments are investable. And once we demonstrate that, educate other investors and hopefully transform the amount of capital that can reach those types of investments. We're able to do that because we take a lower return ourselves in the middle, so we make sure the investors still get market returns and the community gets what they need. And we often work with blended finance in the middle, leveraging government funds and other types of capital to make the money work.
Talofa lava. I'm Paul Schroeder. I'm the CEO of Australian Super. We're Australia's largest superannuation fund. We manage about 500 billion tala on behalf of 3.5 million Australians, 100,000 of them Pacific Islanders, and 4,700 of them Samoans. So I'll be happy to talk a bit more about that a little bit later on.
Yeah, talofa lava, malole, soifua malangima. Special welcome to all our foreign delegates to this business forum. An honor and a privilege to be part of this first plenary. I'm Sauletiti Maeva-Bifimva'ai, the CEO for the Ministry of Finance in Samoa. Formerly, I used to work with the World Bank and with the Asian Development Bank, and I returned back to my government as CEO after starting my career here in the Treasury Department many, many years ago, Thank you.
Talofalava, Bulavinaka. My name is Nambuka Soni. I'm the Chief Investment Officer of Fiji National Provident Fund. We're a US $5 billion fund, about 80% invested in emerging markets, predominantly around the region. And it's a pleasure to be here today and to join you in these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, panel. Just for a further introduction, my name is Loretta Joseph. I run something called the Policy Group. I spent 30 years of my life in banks, running banks, and been a derivatives trader. I think I've traded most asset classes. So I'm very delighted to be the moderator of this panel. And I think as we delve into these discussions, something that's really close to my heart, and we look at access to finance in small island developing states and emerging markets, I think it's impossible to overlook the transformative role that we see that of digital finance, digital assets and innovative technologies are playing in driving economic growth. Technology offers us unique opportunities to leapfrog traditional barriers, whether that's through mobile banking platforms that reach the unbanked, things like blockchain technology ensuring transparent and secure financial transactions, and digital assets which enable cross-border trade much more efficiently. For regions historically underserved by conventional finance, these advancements provide us a path to inclusion, economic resilience and growth. I think the potential for digital finance services to broaden access to capital, to reduce transaction costs and to foster trust amongst investors and local populations is enormous. As we explore these innovative investment strategies today, we must also consider how best to leverage these digital tools for a catalyst of economic development and growth and ensure, as we say for the Commonwealth, that no one is left behind in the digital economy. So without further ado, I've got some discussion points for my panel. So we'll start at my end of the panel. So what do you think that we see financial inclusion evolving for small states and emerging markets? And what are the keys and barriers and opportunities to improving access to finance in these regions from your lens?
Thank you. Well, financial inclusion obviously is one of the most important prerequisites for global development, for shared prosperity and for travelling along the well-trodden path to growth, which is how we kind of describe our investment process. We're looking for countries which are starting at that earlier stage of GDP per capita of $1,000 to maybe $3,000 per capita, predominantly agrarian, some subsistence existence. So we're looking to see how we can track those countries, make that same progression along that path to secular growth, urbanisation, like manufacturing, disposable income. A story that we've seen really since the 1700s, since the Industrial Revolution. We can track that all the way through the development of the US, obviously in Japan, Korea, post the rise of Hong Kong and Southeast Asia, and obviously recently the rise of China. All of that has been driven by financial inclusion. It's amazing to think that about 1.5 billion people around the world still don't have access to a formal bank account, and even 1 in 2 people in the developing world haven't used a digital access. Now, what we find incredibly exciting is we can drive impact and sustainability, we can make a real difference to economic growth at the same time as making money for our clients and long-term pensions. But I think it's really amazing to think, and a lot of people forget this, but frontier markets actually have been at the forefront of financial inclusion. If you think that necessity is the mother of invention, who actually really invented mobile money? It's a Swahili word, M-Pesa. This was a Vodafone DFID initiative back in the early 2000s, which how could we use mobile transactions over a brick, a 2G SMS-based technology system, and actually drive forward financial inclusion. And it's often said that the biggest loser of financial inclusion in the Kenyan market was the bus conductors. If you wanted to send 100 shillings to your mother from Mombasa to Nairobi, the bus conductor would take 50% of it. Well, the driving down of transaction costs through mobile technology is incredible. So Safaricom and M-Pesa, that's really driven one of the most amazing aspects of financial inclusion across Africa. And then I look at the Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Indian perspective, and now we've got Dr. Yunus, obviously a very important part of the administration in Bangladesh. We've had some fantastic investments in companies like BRAC, Asha, some of the original NGOs, Grameen, and Dr. Yunus obviously being the real forefather and inventor of microfinance. Some of my most exciting times I've spent in doing research in these countries is actually talking to the micro-entrepreneurs, predominantly the women who want to raise $100, $200 loans to create their microfinance entrepreneurship, whether it's in garment manufacturing, whether it's in retail, and just talking to people who want to borrow $200 on a 6-month basis on a microfinance-based impact. That has a real impact on people's lives. That access to finance, which otherwise wouldn't be available, and obviously initiated out of Grameen and out of Bangladesh, which is now really sweeping the world. So we're very interested in making sure financial inclusion develops. I think it's an incredibly important part of the process. And I think it's important to remember that actually it was Commonwealth countries, Kenya, Bangladesh, which have really been at the forefront of driving inclusion, but there's obviously a lot further to go.
Jennifer, what do you think?
Yeah, so I come at this as a practitioner, moving money. I'm trying to get money out of the capital markets in the U.S., which is a couple $100 trillion market, and put it into local communities. And what I've learned over time is you need intermediaries. And we're usually the first private capital in, demonstrating investability. And what we need to really move money into emerging or island nations are strong intermediaries in those countries. Local banks, local funds, local institutions that know their community, and that we can give a couple $100 million to, or even a couple $1 million to, and they know how to put that to work in their community. So we need those intermediaries to be strong. And what I've found is that they don't exist everywhere. And that's a great place for government to step in, for philanthropy to step in. I heard Mark mention it, stepping in to really bolster up those communities, community intermediaries. When we have strong capillaries or strong pipes all the way to the ground, the money moves well. But when we don't have pipes all the way down, when they're broken, then it gets stuck. And so I'm a big proponent of building up those local intermediaries because they know their communities. And what we're trying to do at Calvert Impact is really just get more of that big money that's sitting in the capital markets unlocked and get comfortable moving into those intermediaries. One example, just earlier this year, the power of intermediaries is, and I think Cygnus is a fund manager, investment intermediary in the Caribbean, and they're now managing a CARICOM fund of about $100 million across multiple countries in the region. That is the first time I have seen as an investor an aggregated intermediary that's large enough that I can put money into, that can get then into small and medium enterprises, that can get into local community infrastructure. Before the advent of that fund, which was supported by USAID and the CDF, the Development Finance Bank of the Caribbean, I would have to go deal by deal by deal through that country. And I can't do that sitting in Washington, D.C. So I just give you that example of the power of intermediaries and where there's a real opportunity to build that ground capacity from all the partners in the room.
Thanks, Jennifer.
I know this is a really serious question and a really serious topic, but I probably won't get the chance to say this. How amazing was it to come in from the airport, for those of you who did, to see all those painted rocks and all the flags and all the incredible... It was just astounding to just arrive and just this incredible sense of welcome and pride and beauty. So I just wanted... It was just an amazing thing to experience. It was just extraordinary. And it sort of really fits with what I was hoping to come and talk about briefly today, which is we talked before about the formal economy and the informal economy and the coming together. And sort of to me, all the beauty is in the informal economy and all the miseries in the formal economy of finance. And so often I'm asked to sort of almost be an interpreter between the real world of all of its beauty and the finance world, which is all of its numbers. And so I would say that one of the things that we look for is scale. And scale is, I just encourage all of the people in this room to say, you don't just have to have scale by yourself. You can have scale together. And that's, I thought the Prime Minister's remark about the Commonwealth was really, what an incredibly great name, like Commonwealth. We've got wealth, we bring it together commonly. It's a bit like the fund. We've got 3.5 million members, 4,700 Samoans, and 37 men called Latu in the fund.
Yeah, and I've got to look after every one of them, and they bring all their money together to create scale. Latu means light. Latu. 37 Latus, 4,700 Samoans, 100,000 Pacific Islanders, and 3.5 million Australians altogether. So you can create scale together. And so I really want to encourage you to think, oh, we're small, we've got different economies, we've got different things we do. But you can bring it together in a common wealth. And that requires understanding and connection and opportunities to come together, which is one of the reasons I'm here, is just to understand and listen and to connect. Because when you come together, you can create scale, and financial markets really love scale. And the other thing I was going to suggest is stability and security. So chopping and changing is really bad for money. Money hates insecurity. Money hates rapid changes. I know people, I get it, but if you were saying, how would you make the blue ocean Pacific a continent, how do you make that whole continent investable? Scale, you can do it together. Stability, you can do it just by thinking about it, just not upsetting things too much. And then security. And, you know, this whole region is full of good-willed, honest people, and you just need to demonstrate that in your context of security. And I think the theme's got resilience in there as well. And so a little bit later on today, we're going to get together and talk about a scheme between us and the Pacific Island investment funds. All of the funds, each of the key countries has a pension fund. And you should think about how you can use them and build their scale and build their strength. Because Australian Super started very, very small, less than $1 million, and now we're 500 billion tala. And so scale, stability, security, and you can get all of those by working together.
They were great. Thank you so much. So,
Thank you. Before I respond, let me acknowledge the presence of our Finance Minister, which means I've got to be constructive in my response to the two questions. But first of all, we have to recognize that SIDS are unique in their development challenges and their national priorities. And I believe financial inclusion is still, it remains a challenge for SIDS and emerging markets. So it will evolve, but at a very slow pace, dependent on many factors, including one, the quality and resilience of ICT infrastructure, still a challenge in the Pacific. The quality of its financial systems, still a challenge in Samoa. The level of financial competency, still an issue in the Pacific. And the quality of data that we collect in order for us to monitor progress of financial inclusion over time. So for Pacific SIDS, I am speaking on behalf of the Pacific SIDS. I think we're taking a Pacific approach. You learn something new, you observe it, you think about it, you sleep over it before you actually decide whether to use it or adopt it. So it's a very cautious approach, but once that requires a balancing act, because we also have to be mindful of the cybersecurity issues and, of course, the consumer protection issues that come with using digital transformation. For Samoa, the evolution started back in 2012 when financial inclusion did become a focal area for government. And we did launch a national financial inclusion strategy for 2027-2020. Despite all the progress that was done, there were still a lot of gaps. And one critical area was the limited progress that we've done on delivering financial education. According to the central bank, and I'm quoting here, one of the greatest achievements coming out of the first strategy was the recognition and the belief from various stakeholders of the positive impacts of financial inclusion policy agenda. So it's that ownership and that recognition, I think, is critical for building partnerships that we need in order to further progress the work of financial inclusion and promoting it in Samoa. I think the COVID-19 pandemic also brought to the fore and presented an opportunity for financial inclusion initiatives to be used widely. Government in particular did try as much to use financial inclusion and digital financial systems to disperse a lot of its stimulus and response initiatives. So currently we're implementing the second national financial inclusion strategy, and we finally have put in place a definition that contextualizes what it means for Samoans. As I said, the states are all unique in their development challenges. The policy agenda for financial inclusion is driven by the finance sector, Honourable Minister here, but championed by our Central Bank of Samoa. Now, in terms of the key barriers and the opportunities that we can look at to improve access to finance, there's 4 particular key barriers in the case of Samoa. There's still a limited range of financial products, and I do challenge the anchor sponsor and all the banks here, ANZ and so forth, this is the opportunity for the commercial banks to develop sector-focused financial products that suit sector priority or needs. For instance, I'm hearing from Mark that BSB has introduced an agriculture loan that suits the needs of the farmers. There's also the tourism sector. They've got very specific and challenging needs. That's the opportunity for the banks to also look at developing such products. The second key barrier, we still have a very low level of financial literacy. So the opportunity is there for government to fully integrate financial literacy in our education curriculum, starting from primary to post-secondary education. The key is to ensure that financial competency is built at a very young age before we introduce other products. The third one is affordability of existing finance. So while having a bank account is good, accessing loans is still an issue. I'm talking here about the level of the costs in terms of the interest rate, the bank fees. Personally, I believe it's still high. But there's also the cost of compliance in terms of to the terms and conditions of such loans. So the opportunity is there for commercial banks, our key sponsor here, to review such costs and simplify the requirements without compromising your safeguard measures. I want to share my experience dealing with the multilateral development institutions, the World Bank and ADB. So the membership of Samoa in those organizations, international organizations, give us the access to finance, the gateway to finance. But in order to actually access the finance, we have to comply with certain and a lot of safeguard requirements. So such institutions have been there for a while, so they're now much more flexible in their approach, and they've set up special purpose funds that allows the developing member countries, mainly states, to access concessional funding. But when we talk about such new institution like the Green Climate Fund, established for the purpose of providing loans for mitigation and adaptation measures in a lot of the member countries, they're still very young in terms of being flexible with their terms and being responsive to the needs of clients. So I just wanted to note that experience is something that in parallel the private sector can learn from, to be flexible in terms of your products that you do provide for the public. Thank you.
Nambuka.
Thank you. I think just listening to what Marcus said and also James, it reminds me when the first time M-Pesa went online, I think what we did back in Fiji with a telco subsidiary, we sent 2 engineers to Kenya and said, go and study this. They came back and we created M-Pesa. Fast forward now, we do about 4 billion annually. In Fiji alone, we are now about 60% of the FX income coming into Fiji. And this, I think, innovation that has really moved from how do we address the unbanked population. One of the things as well that it has done is the ability for it to create I would say, quasi-bank statements for those who would not have a formal bank statement to get a transaction history to be able to access these things. And I think these are the innovations that have come through financial inclusion, and also how we cascade this across things, including transport. And we've rolled that out in the Pacific, and hope, and those are the learnings, again, coming from us, a fellow Commonwealth country, which we have adopted. I think the advances in technology is quite interesting, and I heard a story about how these advances, including AI, is going to bring, and what the future of the aviation or a pilot would look like. The future, and they said the future would be going into a cockpit, you'd see a pilot and a dog. And they said the pilot would be feeding the dog, and the dog will be ensuring that the pilot does not touch the wheels or the levers. So I think, the innovations that are coming up ahead, it's quite interesting, and I think it will push us, but at the same time, I think the necessary guardrails. And I'm quite optimistic, the innovations that this is going to push for us. And again, we'll probably be discussing in a few other points later, but again, I think the inclusion, there seems to be some traction on the ground, and I think there's more to come. Thanks.
So I guess now another question out to the panel, and then we'll get in deep dive into their level of expertise in specific areas. Trust. Trust is a really important thing for all of us. I deal in the world of crypto assets in trustless technologies, which is very hard for a lot of people to get their head around. But I guess, when we're looking at financial institutions, how do they build and maintain trust amongst their local investors, and particularly in regions that have historically faced a lot of economic instability or lack of infrastructure? We will start.
Great question. I mean, there's no trust in our markets. You don't trade on 3.5 times earnings and have a great degree of trust. So it's a very interesting part of the world where you can look at US assets which trade at 250% of market cap to GDP. Most of G7 trades well north of 100% to market cap to GDP. And most of what I do, with the obviously exception of India, I can access most of these markets at around 10 to 15% market cap to GDP on 3 times earnings. There's very little trust in these markets. And that, to Paul's point about scale and trust and long-term reliability, we've been through a very difficult period in frontier/Commonwealth markets in the last 6 or 7 years, partly caused by COVID, partly caused by the global inflationary period, and partly caused by poor central bank planning. But if you go back to 97, 98, when a great part of Southeast Asia was affected by a very dramatic currency crisis, a very dramatic balance of payments crisis, and that led to this most incredible, ultimately IMF-inspired recovery program. It wasn't any of the emerging markets which suffered dramatic FX falls in the great Fed hiking period of the last couple of years. It was more G7 and fiat, and let's not forget the gold market's telling you exactly what everyone thinks about the $100 trillion developed market deficits at the moment. The young will inherit not the earth, the young will inherit the national debt, as Herbert Hoover said in the 1920s. The great part about what we do in the Commonwealth and frontiers, there's no national debt to inherit because there's been no trust and there's been no capital injected. So we can do scale, to Paul's point, we can do scale, we can do 3 billion people, about half the world's commodities, which are going to be so essential for energy transition. You can't have electricity demand without copper. You can't have copper without Zambia, without Pakistan, without many parts of Australia and Canada. So, we can deliver everything currently other than capital at the moment. And that comes back to the point about trust. And I think what happened in 2022, 2023, and you look at the currency crisis that Jen alluded to in Nigeria and Egypt and Sri Lanka and Pakistan and Bangladesh, I'm hoping that is seen as a seminal cathartic moment in frontier, as much as 97, 98 laid up this incredible emerging market economic revolution, and people question some EM stock market returns, but from an EM economic perspective, there's no doubt that EM today is over 60% of the global economy because they've been so sensationally successful. Indonesia has revolutionized itself in the last 25 years. India has revolutionized itself. So I'm really hoping that the lessons learned of the last 2 or 3 years, we've had dramatic devaluations in the Pakistani rupee, the Bangladeshi taka, the Nigerian naira. If trust comes back, to Paul's point, and if scale comes back in terms of flows, governments, have their own ability to generate trust, and that leads to the virtuous cycle of capital coming back in. To Jen's point, that leads to pension funds raising money, and what we really want to see is domestic funds making money out of recovery and domestic pension fund cycles.
good points, Jennifer.
Yeah, and so where we work is in the private markets, particularly, not the public. And in our private markets, we rely, as I said earlier, on intermediaries to know their markets and put the capital to work. So unlike most financial institutions, we start with the community and work back to the investor. And for us, trust is everything. We start with what the community needs, and not just access to capital, but also as humans. So we look at the people, what they need holistically, housing, health, clean water, as well as access to finance to really have a good life. And so it starts there. Some people call us impact investors. We just say we start with community and work backwards. We're relationship lenders, that's for sure. We lend to intermediaries, so intermediaries that are in the community, as I've said. We look to put that money in their hands and to put it to work. And then we do seek a financial return, but also we collect impact returns, so social, gender, climate, and those returns are very, very important for our investors. So I would say for us, trust is everything. And it's shared trust, it's shared impact, it's shared outcomes built together.
Can I turn it around the other way?
Of course.
Because when we think about the word trust, we prefer to think about the word trustworthy, to be trustworthy. I'll just give you an example of that. If someone says to you, trust me, what does it make you think? Nah. So you can't control that. That's in the eye of the beholder. But what you can control is whether you and your institutions and the people you work with act in a trustworthy way. And just part of trustworthy, there's been a lot of work on trustworthy, but to be trustworthy, you need to be competent at what you say you're doing. You need to be benevolent. That is, you need to do what you say you're going to do. And then you need to act with a character that people would believe and would come to expect of you even when you're not there. And the question of competence is a really important one. So my best friend, his name is Peter. I've known him his whole life. He's a brilliant drummer, like a really great drummer. I completely trust that if we put a drum kit in front of him here, he would play beautifully and you would say, what a great drummer. He's my best friend. But I would not ask him to do surgery on me because he's not a surgeon. I don't trust him to cut me up. And so I would just say, when you're thinking about trust, I'd encourage you to think about trustworthiness. And the key to trustworthiness is to only say you're going to do something that you can do well.
Thank you very much, Paul.
So from my perspective, in the case of Samoa, it's really the lack of infrastructure that requires attention for improvement in order to build that trust and sustain it in terms of working with local investors by the financial institutions. So we actually don't have a specific legislation on critical infrastructure, protection and cybersecurity. So that is something that's crucial if we want to build trust in the digital economy. So addressing online safety is something that we need to ensure to make sure that our digital well-being is progressed over time, strengthening the sector's oversight and compliance by modernizing our ICT legislation. That, to me, should build trust in terms of our local investors. We do have an outdated digital infrastructure that hinders the use of financial services, efficiency of financial services delivery. So that's also an area that the government and the financial institutions, even the non-bank institutions, are working on. One other infrastructure that we do lack, generally speaking, is that we don't have a national digital ID system and a credit bureau, so it's very challenging to conduct customer due diligence. And this somehow contributes to the non-performing loans portfolio, an area that we really need to address in order to expand the use of digital financial services. And finally, the lack of digitization of the banking supervision and regulation reporting by our central bank. This is an area that they need to work on because it actually provides timely information in terms of financial inclusion and the quality of data that's shared to the public. But I'm happy to note that we have secured 2 projects from the World Bank that will help us address both issues in terms of the ICT infrastructure generally, but also the finance sector infrastructure. Thank you.
Nambuka.
Well, like Paul, by law, members have to contribute funds into the superannuation. So, makes our work even harder in terms of the trust because that's mandated. So without the choice. And I think that's where the element of trustworthy. I think through the discussions on trustworthy is a building that interlinkages and at the same time the reporting backwards that allows us to portray what we are doing. And I think most corporates do quite well, and banks are held to that high regard, especially in the financial services where there is this capital flow that flows to opportunities, but at some point it's always tagged to trust with the hope of an expectation of return. I probably leave it at that.
Thank you. And it's an interesting one. It leads into the next question that I will ask those of the panel that would like to answer it. But technology and digital finance, what are the roles that they're playing as we see expanding into the small island states and emerging markets, and what innovations do we see as really promising? In my other life, I write laws and regulations around crypto assets. And it's interesting because, in the world of crypto, we talk about trustless systems. So I trust maths, 2 + 2 = 4. I don't necessarily need to trust an intermediary. But we've seen lots of cases, and many of you have probably got very different and differing ideas about what crypto is and what it does to the world. I view it in one way, and everybody has a different view of how this infrastructure is going to change us. But what I do see is that we have young populations that are digitally native, and in the Commonwealth, we're the biggest in all of the world with the number of people that are under 30. So there hasn't been much trust in the world of the crypto assets. So in one of my other lives, I write laws to make sure that we manage consumer investor protections, and we manage AML risks, and we keep people safe from bad people using technology, which they always do. But I think technology is crucial for our progression forward as people in the Commonwealth, and also expands access to finance that we haven't seen. There's new ways that we can access finance that overcome the traditional barriers like geographical isolation, lack of banking infrastructure and financial exclusion, which things like blockchain technology actually bring. So blockchain and the very technology that the applications are built on, things like virtual assets, decentralised finance, and other things called stablecoins, which some of you may have heard of or may not have. They enable secure, decentralised alternatives to traditional finance systems that we're seeing. We can now do peer-to-peer banking. We can each be our own bank, and we can transfer an asset 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to anyone else in the world that we've never been able to do with traditional finance. So these crypto marketplaces and what we're seeing in the tokenisation of assets that exist and assets that don't exist, it's creating new opportunities for trade and investment, and innovations in mobile banking and digital ID systems can further enhance access to people that haven't had this access before. Many of us in the Commonwealth don't have bank accounts, and that's a barrier to entry for financial inclusion. So I think these technologies, as long as they're combined with proper regulatory frameworks, which is something I'm very cautious about, they offer transformative ways and potentials for sustainable development in many regions that we haven't seen. So I think that's an interesting point. So now again, I think we'll move on. Salatiti, I think a good question for you to enhance this. Looking ahead, so what innovative investment strategies do you believe will be most effective in fostering sustainable economic development in emerging markets such as Samoa and other island states, and how do you see these strategies scaling to maximise impact?
Okay, thank you. In the context of Samoa, some of the innovative strategies that I believe would be effective in fostering sustainable economic development, I've got 3 suggestions. One, we can adopt a genuine investment partnership approach between the public sector, the government and the private sector in financing public goods. So the risk and the cost are shared. Public goods, for example, a national airline, hot topic in Samoa, and the submarine cable. For improved connectivity and tourism development, these are costly investments that require private sector business mindsets to operate it, but also government support in facilitating the enabling regulatory environment. And the key, I believe, is for both sides to financially invest so that the commitment is there to succeed or for success. So when we jointly invest in such public goods, we are investing for public interest. We are investing for increased business and employment opportunities created along the way. And we are investing in everyone's quality of life. So let me provide an example. When we set up the submarine cable company for construction of the international gateway, Tui Samoa cable, the government at the time, we did not have the expertise in the area of submarine cable and very limited in the private sector. So what we did was to create a private company that's co-shared or had shareholding in terms of government that was held by three or four public bodies and the two service providers. So the arrangement was to ensure that both do invest in the new setup of the new company. But the public funding that we secured for construction of the cable was then on lend to the new company. So in the end, we shared the risk with the private sector, we shared the cost, but we've also earning in terms of our on-lending receipts and also the dividends through the private sector holders. So that's one of the innovative strategies that I believe could also could help with sustainable development. One of the other initiatives that we can look at is the debt-to-equity conversion to assist private businesses, especially in critical sectors such as tourism following disasters. And this can be scaled to maximize the impacts. We did do this after the COVID period, the pandemic, for the tourism sector, in particular, without telling names. I'm sure our Samoan colleagues here know about it, but we did do a debt-to-equity conversion in one of the key hotels to ensure that the operations are sustained. We were thinking in the public interest more about the opportunities in terms of employment and all the small businesses that would benefit if this particular hotel would continue to operate in Samoa. And by doing that, we are seeing the fruits of that innovative strategy that the government took, and we are happy with the outturn so far. One other innovative solution that can be scaled for impacts is the government, after the COVID period, looking at reviving all the businesses, and the opportunity was there with the host of Chocom. We provided a highly concessional loan scheme through the Development Bank. It's a government-owned bank, so we provided the grant to Development Bank to make sure that they are not financially affected. But the terms of the loan and the amount was restricted, but the terms was heavily subsidized by government in order for small businesses, the SME community, to get access for sustaining and, of course, reviving their businesses. So those are some of the innovative strategies that I think we can scale up and ensure that there's impact in terms of sustainable development. Thank you.
So thank you for that. I'll come back to you in a sec. But James, I just want to touch on something. Your frontier markets, they often face significant and political and economic instability. So what are the key factors you consider when making investment decisions in these environments? And how do you mitigate the risks while still fostering any impactful investments that contribute to local economic growth?
Well, it's obviously kind of a great question and comes really to the heart of what we do. We kind of almost pick countries like we pick stocks, in essence. We talk to the central bank governor. He's, in effect, the CFO of a country. We talk to the prime minister, the president. We understand the long-term direction of a country. We want to understand the long-term political ambitions of a country. You know, how are they going to set the education? How are they going to set the taxation? How are they going to attract inward investment? And the key thing is really comes down to two things. It's young people, education, and giving people jobs. We've just seen this incredible miracle of China. China had to create 20 million jobs a year for 2 decades. You know, China now needs to create wealth. China no longer has the demographic issue. And I think a lot of the conversations we've had so far today have been about the challenge of creating jobs for, as we said, 60% of the world's young people coming through frontier in the Commonwealth. So it really comes down to understanding, you know, what is the right political initiatives. You know, governments choose how to drive forward currencies, and to the point about trust and, you know, corruption is obviously a problem in some governments, making sure that the money is reinvested back into the country. Encouraging long-term pension fund savings into countries is incredibly important. So we spend a lot of time understanding the macro and the geopolitics and the governmental decisions to work out, you know, is this country going to deliver, to the point, the trust gap? You know, is this country the right place to invest a dollar? I spend my life trying to encourage people to look at a dollar invested in Bangladesh or Pakistan or Kenya or Nigeria is as important in your portfolio as a dollar invested in Nvidia. But for that to happen, comes back to the point you've been making, is the government going to return on that capital and grow that capital over time?
Could I make a comment on the Ministry of Finance direction?
Yes.
Just on this, in the spirit of scale and collaboration, because I think collaboration is going to be key to this, each understanding the other. Just drawing on the experience of another great Commonwealth nation, the Indians have a National Indian Infrastructure Fund. And I was fortunate enough to meet with the PM Modi about this, to commend them on having created that fund. It's one that we invest in. And what they did was to say, well, the government knows a lot about the country and what's needed, and the private sector and the investment markets know what needs to be achieved in order to get an investable proposition. And so there was a very deliberate attempt to bring together government plus the public sector plus construction and capability and all the approvals and regulation, and then thinking about what's investable. And so you won't be able to just go, oh, let's do that here. But just the idea behind that National Indian Infrastructure Fund, another Commonwealth nation, I'm sure there could be some good sharing and some good learning about the NIF.
But I think that's one thing about the Commonwealth. We've got big countries and small countries, and 2.8 billion of us, I think that was the last number I heard. We can all learn from each other, and we are the biggest trade organisation on the planet. So I really appreciate that, Paul. That's a great introduction to that. But on that, Paul, I'm just going to come back to you quickly. So what do you think the primary hurdles that superannuation and pension funds face when they consider investments in small states and emerging markets? And how do you think these regions can position themselves to attract more capital?
Okay, well, this is where I get miserable. The very biggest hurdle, and one that I will never move away from, is that we represent the 3.5 million people and the 100,000 Pacific Islanders and the 4,700 Samoans and the 37 Latus, and I won't take a discount on that ever. So they need to get their risk-adjusted return post-tax, post-fees to fund their retirement. So the biggest hurdle is, please don't ever, even with a friendly face or in a lovely environment, say, I'd like you to do something that cuts them short. Right? So just don't be in any doubt about it. There is a great opportunity to align capital markets and initiatives, but please don't say, oh, somebody, say for example, there are 35 cleaners in the fund called Tatiana. She's got $53,000. Please don't say that she should take a discount because something needs to be done somewhere. So that's the hardest thing. I'll do that politely. I'll do it courteously. I'll do it with love in my heart. But I'm not giving you 1 cent of her money for the wrong return. Right? It's just not going to happen. So the biggest hurdle is you need to structure something that's investable and you can get a decent return. There's plenty of opportunities for that. But not only is that our whole orientation, but it's the law. It's the law for you as well. So don't think you can somehow, because something's a really great need, and it always is, that somebody should invest in that at a suboptimal, risk-adjusted return post-tax and post-fees. So that's the single biggest hurdle, because that's my job, is to make those people the most money for their retirement. Beyond that, I think it's where we started, which is just a lack of understanding. People who live normal lives don't understand finance. Finance people don't understand nearly anyone who has a normal life. Right? It's just ridiculous. There's a real economy and there's an unreal economy. And the more times we can bring people together and discuss and engage, what are your pressures and what are your measures and what are my pressures and what are my measures, the more times we can get together and have that discussion and get rid of the gobbledygook. Because a lot of people don't understand numbers. A lot of people don't understand percentages. I saw something recently that 75% of people don't understand percentages and the other half struggle with it as well.
That's a really good one. And what I always look to is, technologists are not policy writers and policy writers are not technologists. So, technology does go across finance and, I think it comes back to the key that we keep talking about, collaboration. Nobody's got all the answers in any of this. We need to work together and we need to collaborate and we need to learn from each other. So moving on to that, Jennifer, I'm going to move to you quickly. So in what you do, you have a strong focus on channeling capital into sectors that mainstream markets often overlook. What specific sectors within the small states and emerging markets do you see as having the most transformative potential?
Yeah, and it's wonderful following Paul and his comments, because you're kind of starting to see how the markets can help each other evolve. Where we play is right under Paul, so to speak. Markets, like Paul has said, like scale, they like what they know. They don't like the unknown. And that usually means something new or a new type of borrower, a new type of technology doesn't fit well yet into what Paul can invest. And that's what we can do at Calvert Impact. And we want to demonstrate that those investments aren't as risky as people perceive they are. And once we can show that over time, our hope is that we can grow it so that Paul could give it a little nibble. He might think, okay, I understand what the return profile of that asset is, so your investors won't lose or take any below market risk, and we can move these investments over into larger markets. Because there's many things that need to be scaled that will really support climate adaptation, mitigation, small businesses, and all the rest. So you're starting to see how kind of the markets evolve and change. And even outside the Commonwealth in the United States, it warms my heart, Prime Minister, to hear what you did for small businesses, because we did something similar in the U.S. And now the hope is that we can take that model and scale it, because a lot of those loans are performing very, very well. And it's collecting that data so we can then show to traditional markets that smaller businesses are just as investable as larger businesses. So it's how do you take some of these opportunities and really bring them to the capital markets in the way that they're digestible, they work with the system, the scale, the data, the track record, the return features are all there so they're easily investable.
And risk is an interesting one. I mean, I work in the very risky assets, crypto assets, which people like Paul probably aren't going to touch for a long time because they're very high risk. But I also come from a country like Australia where we're not risk averse in putting holes in grounds to see if there's minerals, but we're quite risk averse when it comes to technology. But I think as we move, and the digital natives, everyone under 30, their appetite for risk and their understanding of risk, even if someone like me was a banker, my 20-year-old has a better understanding of the risk than I ever did, because she has instantaneous access through the internet to information. So I think it's an interesting one. So now, look, I'm going to my microphone there. Blended finance. So it's often seen as a way to bridge the gap between the public and private capital in developing regions. What specific approaches to blended finance do you believe can unlock further investments in small island states and emerging markets?
Thank you. Let me just paint you a picture of the market that we do live in this here. First, opportunities are far and few. Scale, maybe only the likes of Papua New Guinea, you probably would have scale. But when we look at the other Pacific islands, you need to look at it as a single market in order to do scale. We've had some working examples in which we have done through the telco in doing a consolidation strategy around, including the play in the financial services with Mark and his team. So with that challenges, and then inhibiting that is the capital flows restrictions that we basically operating with one hand behind our back. So when we look at that, the investable universe is already very slim. And I think that's the context that we look at. And the opportunities for us to do something is that we need to really, it pushes us at certain times to do active management. And I think that's the conundrum we do face. The question that we have is how do we approach the blended, and some sectors call it the PPP. We look at it in a new dimension where, like us and like Paul and the team, we look at market imperative. And that's something that will push all of us to do things because we are here for the returns of our members. And market imperative is always first and foremost. And in these markets, if we can find a platform that kinds of brings together the likeness of a market imperative proposition from a commercial private sector venture and taking along with the things of the public sector, who might be able to achieve, from a small outlay, a geo-sized political outcomes, it does work well. And I'll give you an example. We're looking at opportunity at the moment, and it's been announced. It's the Google venture that's crisscrossing the Pacific from the US to Japan to Australia to Chile and Hawaii, Guam, Fiji, and French Polynesia. So in itself, the business case stacks for the hyperscalers, in this case, Google. But along the way, there's 20 countries, 21 Pacific Island countries that could be connected for the first time or second time. And I think the multilateral agencies and a few others have looked at it as an opportunity. By the way, it's a small outlay, but the outcome in terms of geopolitical outcomes is far-reaching. And I think when we look at those examples, there's ways that we can look at opportunities that we would never be able to achieve. And I think that's the benefit of looking at such platforms. I think the others, just like all of us, we are purely capital allocators. And for us, we need people who are seasoned and who know operational management of certain businesses. And I think, we look at our counterparties and also how best we could look at doing those things. But so I think in terms of a blended finance approach, I think we need to find something that ticks all the boxes for everyone. And it needs to be a whole stack approach, which includes regulation. It also needs to look at the literacy in those areas and the infrastructure end-to-end rather than just a piecemeal approach.
Okay. So that's a good segue, I think, to Titi. Scaling projects in the Pacific, they're challenging. We find them in most island states has been challenging. In 1 minute, because I have to quickly run around and I'm mindful that we're between lunch and the audience, any successful models or examples that we can learn from in your experience?
Yes, so definitely agree with the fact that scaling projects in Pacific seats is challenging given our geographical sizes, our rather limited capacity, and the economies of scale issue. A great example that we have yet to see the success, but we've started, it's the recently approved 77 million Pacific Strengthening Correspondent Banking Relationships Project, an initiative jointly funded by 8 Pacific countries, using their national IDA allocation, leveraging regional IDA, and will be implemented at national level, but regional oversight is provided by the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat. I think the fact that individually it took us, individual countries, a while to get anything done, but as a group, as a region, we have made start or have actually taken the first step to work together, because working as a Pacific region will also address the issue of transactions. Individually, we have very small transactions to attract a lot of these correspondent banks from around the world. So, that's one of the areas that I think we've we've actually been able to apply scalability. And we do look forward to the success when we actually implement it. Thank you.
So, James, quickly over to you, and I'm going to being the timekeeper. You have the focus at Red Wheel on active engagement, sustainability with equity capabilities. So, how do you integrate sustainability into your investment decisions for emerging and frontier markets?
Well, I mean, sustainability sits at the heart of what we do. You can't do a 20-year DCF if the company doesn't exist in 20 years' time. So sustainability has to be paramount. So I just quickly wanted, I know it's the last comment, I was slightly kidnapped by Lord Marland and obviously didn't want to face the Jekyll and Hyde of financial markets. So looking for my treasure island, I was thinking of what I could finish on. And I came up with CHIPS, the Commonwealth Handset Investment Pension Solution. So, I spend my life trying to raise money for frontier markets to invest and to Paul's point, to deliver fantastic returns. And I suddenly thought there are 140 million people a year who turn 18. So about 100 million of those live in the Commonwealth. And if the big problem is lack of access to this, why don't we give 100 million Commonwealth citizens on their 18th birthday every year a handset? And why don't we preload it with a pension fund? So if you give 100 million people a $100 handset, that's about $10 billion. And if you give everyone $5 a month into their pension and tell them you're going to get it at 60, 42 years of investing $5 of someone else's money, which is even nicer than a pension, leads to about $2,500 of contributions. We compounded about 15% in dollars a year for the last decade. Let's halve that because people won't believe that that's sustainable. But you compound at 42 years at 8% a year, you'll have about $7,500 in a pension fund. A lot of people around the world will think that's a lot of money. Now, His Majesty the King is probably the world's best pen pal, as was reported the other day. But we are in a digital world, and it's a new generation. So why don't we think about digital pension pals? Because of the 100 million people around the Commonwealth, let's just say 40% come from richer countries, and they probably don't need the cost of that Starbucks a month in their pension. Why do we let people develop pension pals around the world? You can either anonymously or directly give your pension to someone else on their mobile phone, develop a relationship, whatever it is, but as to Paul's point, come together, create scale. So this scheme costs very little money, $10 billion a year for handsets. Most people aren't going to want a $100 handset. They're going to say, fine, I won't have it. So let's just say it costs $3 billion for handsets, $5 a month for 100 million people comes out about $60 million, $6 billion a year. Again, pretty tiny in the great scheme of the world's $350 of financial assets. So anyway, here today, CHIPS, Commonwealth Handset Investment Pension Fund Solutions. Everyone in the Commonwealth gets a handset aged 18 with a pension.
Well, fun fact, most people in the Commonwealth actually have access to a mobile device, and it's 3G and above. Quickly, we're going to call on you in 1 minute. So given the challenges of attracting capital in these developing markets, what role, and you touched on it a bit when you were talking about India, should governments in the private sector play in creating a favourable investment environment?
We should work together, we should learn together to create a Commonwealth, and we should be open to understanding that we don't really understand each other yet.
I love it. Jennifer, in your experience, quickly, in raising capital for projects in markets that are traditionally underfunded, what are the barriers in working with governments to provide opportunities for mobilising capital at scale?
Yeah, it's been the opposite for me. They've created enabling environments that we've come in under, just like Paul is saying. And so those governments that are creating the legislation, I heard some key pieces that the Prime Minister's office is thinking about. We keep our eye on that, and then we see an opportunity to finance once those legislations, that enabling environment comes in. So great opportunities when governments are really there and trying to move things forward.
Well, I don't want to keep the audience between here and lunch because you might get hangry. So I guess in closing, my panel's been wonderful and it's been an absolute pleasure to be a moderator. I think from just surmising on what everybody said, it's clear that unlocking sustainable economic growth in small developing states and emerging markets does require a multifaceted approach. And that includes fostering, as we've heard, public-private partnerships, leveraging blended finance, building investor confidence. So as we've discussed today in this panel, the integration of digital finance and technology is also equally critical. And I think by harnessing the power of collaboration and harnessing the power of digital innovation, we can dismantle a lot of the traditional barriers that we've seen in the emerging world, and we can create new opportunities for inclusive growth and ensures that the most remote communities have access to the tools and resources that they need to thrive. So as the Commonwealth, with our shared values and our internet-connected economies, it's uniquely positioned to lead this transformation, I think. Let's all work together to help build a more resilient, inclusive and prosperous future for all our members. Thank you very much, and I want to say a big thank you to my panel. Please put your hands together.